Hi, this is Mrs. Parr, and on this episode of Math Up to Par, we are going to be talking about measurement, specifically about estimating lengths in both U.S. customary and metric units. So let's look at what length is, okay? So length is actually the distance between 2 points on a line, okay? So it is just measuring the place where it starts to the place where it stops. So in the United States, we have a different unit of measurement than we do in the rest of the world. And so we use a customary system, okay? And one of the small units that we use, the smallest unit is called an inch, okay? An inch is about the length of a paperclip, okay, give or take a little bit. The next largest common unit of measurement that we use in the United States is the foot. More than 1 foot would be feet, okay? And that's about the height of a sheet of paper, okay? After a foot, okay, our next unit of measurement up is a yard, okay? That's what football fields are measured in. It's about the length of a baseball bat, give or take, okay? And then one of our biggest units of measuring length is a mile, okay? And that's just about how far a person can walk in 20 minutes. Depending on how fast you walk, it may be shorter, it may be longer, okay? So these are the most common units that we use to measure length in the United States. So an inch would be the smallest, a foot would be the next one up, then a yard, then a mile. The metric system is something that they use in the rest of the United States, and scientists use the metric system when they are measuring in the United States so that their units match up with other scientists. They have a really, really small unit of measurement, and that unit is called a millimeter. That is about the tip of that pencil right there, or if you think about your fingernail, it's about the width of your fingernail. So it's a really, really tiny amount, okay? And then after the millimeter, you have a centimeter. There's 10 millimeters in a centimeter. So a centimeter is about the width of your thumb from one end to the other. Then it jumps really large in the metric system. There are other units of length in between a centimeter and a meter, which is what we're going to talk about next. But most commonly, they aren't used as much. So from a centimeter, the next unit we have is a meter. A meter is about the length of a yard. It's slightly longer, but not much at all. So we think about a baseball bat for that. So anything that you would measure in meters, you could measure in yards as well. They're very comparable to each other. It just depends on whether you're needing a metric or a customary measurement. And then our long unit that's comparable to a mile is a kilometer. And that is shorter than a mile. So it says about how far a person could walk in 20 minutes. It probably maybe be closer to 15 minutes. But again, it just depends on the speed that the person is walking. So a kilometer is comparable to miles when you're talking about further distances. Okay, so millimeters are really, really, really tiny. Centimeters are also small, a little bit bigger than millimeters. And then we have our meters and our kilometers. So let's talk about some instances when we would use these measurements in real life. So here's kind of a word bank right here in yellow of the 8 different measurements we learned about for both the United States customary and the metric. So if I had a flagpole, okay, and I had to measure from the bottom of it to the top, we need to pick a unit that would be the best to measure that with. In the United States, the best customary unit would be a yard for that. And remember, we said a yard is very comparable to a meter. So yards and meters would be the best units to use to measure a flagpole. If I was measuring the distance from Lynchburg to Richmond in Virginia and I was driving, I would not want to tell you how many centimeters I was traveling. I would not want to tell you how many feet I was traveling. Because it is a long distance, I want a bigger unit. So I would use miles for customary, and I would use kilometers for metric. Really the point of it is if it's a bigger distance, if it's a bigger amount, you want to use a bigger unit because then that number is going to make more sense. Because you're going to be able to visualize that and imagine that easier than you would if I converted it to centimeters and I told you it was, millions of centimeters long. It's kind of hard to imagine how long that would take instead of saying, it's 10 or 20 miles long. All right, for an apple, whether I'm measuring like the height of it or the distance around it, really, the best unit for customary would be our smallest unit. Our smallest unit in the customary is an inch, okay? And our best metric unit would probably be a centimeter. Remember, a millimeter is our smallest unit, but a millimeter is going to be used to measure something really, really, really small. And a centimeter is smaller than an inch. There's about 2.5 centimeters in an inch. And so that's going to be better to use to measure those small things, but not the really, really teeny tiny things. All right, next is the width of a coin. I'm not talking about how wide it is across. If you were to take a penny and turn it sideways and just look how thick it is, so I could have said the thickness of a coin, that best metric unit, that would be that millimeter right there. In US customary, we don't have really anything that's smaller than an inch that we use commonly. So you would have to use the inch, but you would have to use like a fraction of that inch, a decimal of that inch, a really small amount. So I'm going to write fraction of an inch because an inch itself, it's not even going to be anywhere close to an inch for the width of a coin. So we'd have to use a fraction. So we'd have to use a smaller than one whole amount. If I'm talking about the height of a desk, so from the floor to where you're sitting at, the best unit for customary would be feet, okay? We don't have something that's comparable to feet in metric that we use as commonly. There is something that compares, but it's not something that we use as commonly. So really, it's not going to be a millimeter because a millimeter is way too tiny. So the next level up is centimeter, and then the one after that is meter. So meter is like a baseball bat. So your desk probably is about the height of a baseball bat. So a meter would probably be best, but if it's a shorter desk, if it's a tiny table or something like that, a centimeter might be better. So I'm going to say meter or centimeter. I'm going to put in parentheses because there might be an instance depending on the desk. So when you're given, different items, it's important that you use the right tool, the right unit to measure it. And this is because if you don't use the right unit, then you won't really be able to visualize the distance of something. So it's really important that when you're measuring length, you use the unit that is the best fit for whatever the length is. But just know that between those, you can also convert them, which is going to be in another video. So thank you so much for watching today. Happy practicing.